Have you ever felt completely invisible? Judged and dismissed before you've even spoken a word? What happens when the very people paid to provide a service decide you don't belong, based on nothing more than the color of your skin? Today, we're telling the story of Dr. Alani Williams, a woman whose quiet brilliance was met with loud prejudice at an exclusive airport lounge. The staff of Ascendia Air's Zenith Club thought they were protecting their velvet rope from an outsider. They were about to learn she wasn't just a guest. She owned the rope, the velvet, and a sizable piece of the company that paid their salaries. Stay tuned for a story of breathtaking arrogance and the devastating karma that followed. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. It was a cacophony of rolling luggage wheels clattering against polished terrazzo floors, the distant, garbled announcements of final boarding calls, and the low hum of 1,000 different conversations in a dozen different languages. For Dr. Alani Williams, it was just noise, a necessary gauntlet to be run between one life and the next. She'd just spent 3 days in a sterile New York conference room, locked in grueling negotiations over the third-round funding for a biotech firm that promised to revolutionize genomic sequencing. Her mind was still buzzing with complex valuations and patent litigation clauses. Her body, however, was simply tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that travel always amplified. Her flight to Zurich, the first leg of a trip to address a global symposium on applied quantum theory, wasn't for another 3 hours. All she wanted was a pocket of silence, a comfortable chair that wasn't bolted to the floor, and a glass of still water with a slice of lemon. She wanted the sanctuary she paid a premium for, the Zenith Club, Ascendia Air's flagship lounge. Alani clutched the handle of her sleek, graphite-colored carry-on. She was dressed for comfort on the long-haul flight, a simple but elegant pair of black silk trousers, a soft cashmere sweater in a deep amethyst hue, and comfortable leather flats. Her hair was styled in intricate, shoulder-length locks, a few of which were threaded with delicate silver wire that caught the light. On her wrist was a simple, understated watch, its value apparent only to those who understood horology. There were no flashy logos, no ostentatious jewelry. She projected an aura of quiet confidence and intellectual rigor, not of performative wealth. To the undiscerning eye, she was just another traveler. The entrance to the Zenith Club was designed to be imposing. 2 massive, frosted glass doors stood like silent sentinels, a discreet, platinum-colored logo, a stylized A with a wing, gleaming under a single spotlight. It was a gateway meant to separate the weary masses from the privileged few. As she approached, the automatic doors hissed open, revealing a reception desk carved from a single block of white marble. Behind it stood a young man, who looked as though he'd been sculpted from the same material. His blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, his jaw sharp, and his Ascendia Air uniform was so crisp it looked like it might shatter. A small engraved nameplate on the desk read, "Julian Vance, Guest Relations Specialist." Alani stepped forward and placed her first-class boarding pass and passport on the marble countertop. "Good evening," she said, her voice low and smooth, carrying the faint, pleasant rasp of fatigue. Julian's eyes flicked from her face, down to her simple attire, then to her documents, and back up to her face. A flicker of something, confusion or perhaps mild disdain, crossed his features before being smoothed away into a mask of professional neutrality. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but Alani saw it. She had seen it 1,000 times before, in boardrooms, at academic conferences, in high-end boutiques. It was the silent snap judgment that she was out of place. "One moment, please," Julian said, his tone clipped and cool. He took her boarding pass and scanned it. The machine beeped affirmatively. He then typed her name into his computer, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. He stared at the screen for a moment, too long, his brow furrowed. "Is there a problem?" Alani asked, keeping her voice even. Julian didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the monitor. "I'm just verifying your access credentials, ma'am. One moment." The use of ma'am was technically polite, but his delivery coated it in a thin veneer of condescension, as if it were a title she hadn't quite earned. He tapped a few more keys, then looked up, his professional mask firmly back in place, but his eyes were cold. "I'm sorry, but it seems there's a discrepancy. This ticket doesn't appear to grant access to the Zenith Club." Alani felt a familiar wave of weariness wash over her, a feeling entirely separate from her physical exhaustion. It was the fatigue of having to fight these small, pointless battles. "I believe it does," she said patiently. "It's a first-class international ticket. The booking includes Zenith Club access. Perhaps you could check again?" "I have checked, ma'am," Julian replied, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. Sometimes, third-party booking sites can be misleading with the amenities they promise. They advertise lounge access, but it's often for our partner lounges, not the flagship club. He gestured vaguely to his left. "The Meridian Lounge is just down the concourse. I'm sure you'll find it more than adequate." The implication was clear. Your kind of ticket gets you the lesser lounge. This place isn't for you. "I did not book through a third-party site," Alani stated, her voice losing a fraction of its warmth. "I booked directly with Ascendia Air. Corporate account." She slid her Centurion card across the marble. "Perhaps you can check using this." Julian glanced at the imposing black credit card but didn't touch it. It was a clear power play, a dismissal of her credentials. "Our system is linked directly to the ticket's fare class. The card doesn't change what the system says. And the system says you do not have access." He was puffing up his chest, a low-level functionary drunk on the tiny thimbleful of power his position afforded him. He was the gatekeeper of this particular Olympus, and he was not about to let in someone he had decided was a peasant. "Then your system," Alani said, her patience finally fraying, "is incorrect. I would appreciate it if you would find a way to correct it. I have a long flight ahead of me, and I'm very tired." Her directness seemed to embolden him. He saw it not as a reasonable request, but as a challenge to his authority. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were doing her a favor. "Look, I can't just let you in. We have rules, standards. This is one of the most exclusive lounges in the world. We can't have it getting overcrowded." The subtext was a foghorn now, impossible to ignore. "Overcrowded with people like you." Alani felt the heat rise in her chest, a slow burn of indignation. She had negotiated multi-billion-dollar deals with titans of industry who showed her more respect. She had debated Nobel laureates who valued her opinion, and here, in this airport, she was being stonewalled by a glorified doorman with a superiority complex. "I am not asking you to just let me in," she said, her voice now as sharp and cold as the marble desk between them. "I am telling you that I am entitled to be here. Find your supervisor. Immediately." Julian recoiled slightly, taken aback by her sudden shift in tone. His smugness wavered, replaced by a flicker of petulance. He had expected her to be cowed, to slink away to the adequate lounge. He hadn't expected her to push back. "Of course," he said, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Let me get the manager. I'm sure she'll be able to explain the exact same thing to you." He turned and disappeared through a door behind the desk, leaving Alani standing alone in the pristine, silent entryway, the weight of a battle she never wanted to fight settling heavily on her shoulders. The few minutes Alani waited felt like an eternity. The hushed, rarefied air of the lounge beyond the reception desk seemed to mock her. She could hear the faint clink of glasses, the murmur of hushed conversations, the rustle of newspapers. It was the sound of the world she belonged in, a world she was currently being barred from by sheer, unadulterated prejudice. She stood her ground, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. She would not be made to feel small. She would not fidget or look away. She would wait. The door behind the desk opened again, and Julian reappeared. Following him was a woman who moved with the self-important air of a provincial mayor surveying her tiny kingdom. She was in her late 40s, with severely styled auburn hair pulled back into a chignon, so tight it seemed to pull the corners of her eyes. Her uniform was impeccably tailored, a manager's variation on Julian's, adorned with a gold nameplate that read, "Isabella Rossi, Zenith Club Director." Isabella did not look at Alani initially. She first addressed Julian in a loud, deliberate stage whisper, clearly intended for Alani to overhear. "Julian, what is the issue? I trust you've explained our access policies clearly." "Yes, Ms. Rossi," he said, a note of vindication in his voice. "I have explained the policy. The system shows no access for this passenger's fare class." Only then did Isabella turn her attention to Alani. Her eyes, the color of cold slate, performed the same condescending sweep Julian's had, but with more practiced disdain. The assessment was slower, more thorough, and infinitely more insulting. She took in the simple cashmere, the unadorned locks, the comfortable flats. Her thin lips tightened into a small, pitying smile. "Good evening," Isabella began, her voice a weapon of passive aggression, smooth and sharp at the same time. "I'm Isabella Rossi, the club director. Julian informs me there's some confusion regarding your ticket." "There is no confusion," Alani replied, her gaze unwavering. "There is a mistake in your system. I am a first-class passenger on flight AR-72 to Zurich. That ticket grants me access to this lounge. I've been a member of Ascendia's highest frequent flyer tier for over a decade." Isabella clasped her hands in front of her, adopting a posture of patronizing patience. "I understand, and we appreciate your loyalty. However, the Zenith Club has very specific entry requirements. Not all first-class tickets are created equal, you see. Was this ticket perhaps part of a promotional package, or booked with partner airline miles? Sometimes those come with certain restrictions." Every word was carefully chosen to diminish her, to suggest that Alani had stumbled upon her ticket through some lesser, cheaper means, that she was trying to sneak into a party she hadn't been properly invited to. "It was booked through my corporate travel portal. Full fare, no promotions, no partners," Alani said, enunciating each word with precision. "The account is with Williams Thorne Capital." She offered the name of her firm as a key, a piece of information that should have immediately clarified her status to anyone with a modicum of business acumen. Williams Thorne was a powerhouse in the venture capital world, a name synonymous with disruptive tech and staggering returns. The name, however, seemed to mean nothing to Isabella, or if it did, she chose to ignore it. "That's a lovely name for a company," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But I'm afraid company names don't override airline policy. The computer is quite clear." The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. Alani could feel the eyes of a few passengers in the lounge's seating area on them now, drawn by the quiet but tense confrontation at the reception. She felt a flush of humiliation, not for herself, but at the ugliness of the situation. "I would like you to call the Ascendia Diamond Elite Service Desk," Alani instructed, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an unmistakable command. "Give them my name and my frequent flyer number. They will verify my status." Isabella actually laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "Mum, I am not going to tie up my staff and the elite service line because you refuse to accept what the system is telling you. The Diamond Elite Desk is for our most valued customers with urgent travel needs, not for debating established club policies." "I am one of your most valued customers," Alani said, the statement a simple fact, not a plea. "Are you?" Isabella challenged, her voice dripping with skepticism. She leaned in, her smile gone, replaced by a stern, unyielding mask. "We have a certain ambience to maintain in the Zenith Club, a level of decorum. It's a quiet place for our clients to work or relax before their flights. We can't have disturbances at the front desk." The insult was now overt. Alani was a disturbance. Her presence, her quiet insistence on her own rights, was a disruption to their precious ambience. It was in that moment that Alani made a choice. Her first instinct, born of years of navigating similar situations, was to de-escalate, to find another way, to call her personal concierge and have them sort it out. But looking at the smug, self-satisfied faces of Isabella Rossi and Julian Vance, she realized that to back down would be to validate their prejudice. It would be to accept the box they had put her in. And she was done with boxes. "You're right," Alani said softly. Isabella's expression flickered with triumph, assuming she had won. There shouldn't be a disturbance. Alani took a small step back from the desk, her eyes scanning the opulent but sterile reception area. She took in the beige walls, the generic abstract art, the carefully arranged orchids, and then her eyes landed on the far wall, to the right of the entrance. It was a large, burnished bronze plaque, polished to a mirror shine. Etched into its surface were dozens of names under a simple, elegant heading. The founding investors and patrons, Circle of Ascendia Air. It was the airline's version of a donor wall, a monument to the high net worth individuals and capital firms whose initial, substantial investments had helped launch the airline into the stratosphere 2 decades ago, transforming it from a regional carrier into a global luxury brand. It was a wall Isabella and Julian walked past every single day. A wall they probably never truly saw. A slow, cold resolve settled over Alani. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a laser-like focus. She wasn't angry anymore. She was something far more dangerous to people like Isabella. She was determined. "You know," Alani said, her voice conversational, as if she were pointing out an interesting piece of art. "You're both very focused on what your computer screen tells you." She turned her back on them and began to walk slowly, deliberately, towards the bronze wall. Isabella and Julian exchanged a confused look. "Mum, where are you going?" Isabella called out, her tone sharp with annoyance. "The lounge is for authorized guests only." Alani didn't answer. She continued her unhurried walk, her flats making almost no sound on the plush carpet that began where the marble ended. She reached the wall and stood before it, her reflection a ghostly silhouette on the polished metal. She raised her hand, and her index finger began to trace the air, moving past names like the Blackstone Group, J.P. Morgan Chase & Co.'s, and Ellington Partners. She scanned the list, her eyes moving down the columns of engraved text. The names were a who's who of global finance. And then, near the bottom of the second column, she found it. She stopped. She pressed her finger lightly against the cold metal, right next to a name that had been etched there 20 years ago. The silence in the reception area stretched, thin and taut. Isabella Rossi and Julian Vance stood frozen behind their marble fortress, watching the woman they had dismissed with a mixture of irritation and bewilderment. Her deliberate, silent procession to the investor plaque was a move so far outside their standard script of dealing with disgruntled passengers that it left them momentarily paralyzed. They expected shouting, demands, perhaps even tears of frustration. They did not expect this quiet, theatrical solemnity. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to the desk," Isabella finally said, her voice straining to regain its authoritative tone. "If you do not, I will be forced to call airport security." Alani didn't turn around. She kept her finger pressed against the cool brass. "Airport security?" she mused, her voice still calm, but now it carried a new, resonant quality that seemed to fill the space. "Yes, I suppose you could do that. I wonder what you'd tell them the charge is. Loitering, or perhaps admiring the decor too intensely." She finally dropped her hand and turned to face them. Her expression was no longer one of weary frustration. It was one of profound, almost sorrowful disappointment. It was the look of a teacher watching a promising student fail a simple test. "You two are the public face of this airline," Alani said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of an indictment. "You are the gatekeepers. You are entrusted with the brand's most valuable asset, its reputation for premium service and exclusivity. A reputation, I might add, that was built on the capital of the people listed on this wall." She gestured with an elegant open hand towards the plaque behind her. "You stand here day after day, polishing this marble, straightening your uniforms, basking in the reflected glory of a brand you think you understand. But you don't. You see the velvet rope, but you have no idea who paid for it." Isabella's face hardened, her cheeks flushing a dull red. "I don't need a lecture on brand management from you. I need you to either present valid credentials or leave." "My credentials," Alani said, taking a slow step back towards them, "are right there, on that wall. You're so busy looking at your little screen, Julian, you never bothered to look at the foundations of the very building you work in." Julian's eyes darted nervously from Alani to the plaque and back again. He couldn't comprehend what she was implying. It was simply too far outside the realm of his experience. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. Alani's gaze was fixed on Isabella, who stood rigid, her arms crossed, a mask of defiance slipping into place. "Your computer, Ms. Rossi, is a tool. It's meant to aid your judgment, not replace it. Your system is likely down for a data refresh or suffering from a server lag. An experienced manager would have recognized the possibility of a technical error. A good manager would have used discretion. A great manager would have understood that service is not about rigidly enforcing rules, but about understanding the people you are serving." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You did none of those things. You chose instead to make an assumption. You looked at me and decided I couldn't possibly belong here." She stopped directly in front of the desk again. She looked directly into Isabella's cold, slate-grey eyes. "Go and look. Second column. Fourth name from the bottom." A tense silence descended. Julian looked at Isabella, awaiting his cue. Isabella's jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle jumped along her jawline. The idea of obeying this woman, of walking over to that wall at her command, was clearly galling to her. It was an admission of something. She wasn't sure what, but it felt like defeat. "This is ridiculous," Isabella hissed. "This is a childish game." "Is it?" Alani countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Then humor me. Prove to me that I'm just a deluded woman playing games. go and look at the name, or are you afraid of what you might find?" The challenge, delivered so quietly, was more effective than a shout. It pricked Isabella's pride. With a final, withering glare at Alani, she turned on her heel and marched stiffly towards the plaque, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Julian watched her go, his expression a cocktail of anxiety and confusion. Isabella reached the wall. She exuded an air of performative skepticism, as if expecting to find nothing and return to vindicate her judgment. She scanned the first column quickly, then moved to the second. Her eyes traveled down the list of engraved names: Goldman Sachs, the Carlyle Group, KKR & Co. Then her eyes stopped. They widened. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, mottled white that clashed with her severe auburn hair. Her mouth fell slightly open. The polished bronze reflected a face of pure, unadulterated shock. She raised a trembling hand, her fingers hovering over the inscription, as if she couldn't believe it was real. The name her finger pointed to was etched in the same elegant serif font as all the others. Dr. A. N. Williams. Williams Thorne Capital Julian, seeing the profound change in his manager's demeanor, felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He scurried out from behind the desk and rushed to her side. He followed her gaze, and he saw it too. Dr. A. N. Williams. He looked from the name on the wall to the woman standing at his desk, the quiet, tired woman in the cashmere sweater. Williams. The connection finally sparked in his brain, igniting a wildfire of panic. The blood drained from his own face. He stumbled back a step, his mouth agape, looking at Alani as if seeing her for the first time. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a name on the wall, a founder, a patron. She was, in the most literal sense, one of his employers. Isabella remained frozen for another second, her mind frantically trying to process the cataclysmic reality of the situation. Every condescending word, every dismissive gesture, every sneer and insult she had hurled over the past 10 minutes, replayed in her mind, now cast in a horrifying new light. She hadn't been protecting the club from an interloper. She had been barring the gates of Olympus from one of its own gods. Slowly, as if moving underwater, she turned back towards the reception desk. Her mask of authority had not just cracked, it had disintegrated, revealing the raw panic and terror beneath. Her face was a ruin of her former arrogance. When her eyes met Alani's, there was no defiance left. There was only the dawning, sickening realization of a career-ending, life-altering mistake. The silence in the Zenith Club reception was no longer serene. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the sound of a world turning upside down. The transformation was as immediate as it was grotesque. The haughty, imperious Isabella Rossi vanished, replaced by a fawning, trembling sycophant. Her entire posture changed. Her shoulders, once thrown back with authority, were now hunched in a desperate, pleading cringe. The sneer on her lips was replaced by a ghastly, stretched thin smile that didn't reach her terrified eyes. "Dr. Williams," she began, her voice an octave higher than before, laced with a tremor she couldn't conceal. I am so terribly sorry. There has been a dreadful misunderstanding, a systems glitch. It's completely inexcusable." She rushed back to the desk, practically shoving a still paralyzed Julian out of the way. "Julian, for heaven's sake, do something. Get Dr. Williams a glass of champagne, the vintage reserve, and some warm towels, immediately." Julian, startled into motion, fumbled beneath the counter, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grasp the bottle. Alani held up a hand, a simple gesture that halted the frantic, pathetic display. "Please, Miss Rossi, don't," she said, her voice devoid of heat but heavy with finality. It's too late for that." "No, please, doctor," Isabella begged, her composure completely shattered. She was babbling now, her words tumbling over one another in a frantic torrent. "It was the computer. It's been so unreliable lately. We've filed so many IT reports. And the new staff? Julian is new. He's still in training. He doesn't understand the nuances. I was just trying to follow protocol, to protect the integrity of the club, for our most valued members, like you." The attempt to shift blame, to paint herself as a diligent follower of flawed rules, was so transparently false, so craven, that it was almost pitiful. Alani looked at her, not with anger, but with a clinical, detached sort of pity. "Was it the computer, Ms. Rossi, that told you to insinuate I had a promotional ticket? Was it a systems glitch that led you to lecture me on decorum and accuse me of being a disturbance? Was it protocol that made you look at me and decide in an instant that I did not belong?" Each question was a quiet, precise scalpel, dissecting Isabella's flimsy excuses and laying the ugly truth bare. Isabella's face crumpled. "No," she whispered, the fight completely gone from her. "No, I apologize. From the bottom of my heart, I made a terrible error in judgment." "You did," Alani agreed simply. She turned her cool gaze to Julian, who was standing frozen with a bottle of champagne in his hand, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. "You too. You had a choice. When I first presented my credentials, you could have assumed competence. You could have chosen to believe a first-class passenger might actually know the terms of her ticket. You chose condescension. And when your manager escalated the situation, you chose complicity. You stood there and said nothing." Julian winced as if he'd been struck. He couldn't meet her eyes. He just stared at the floor, shame radiating from him in palpable waves. Alani let the silence sit for a moment, allowing the full weight of their actions to settle upon them. From inside the lounge, a man in a tailored suit who had been watching the entire exchange with growing interest discreetly pulled out his phone and began typing. He was Gregory Finch, a senior editor for a major business journal, and he knew a story when he saw one. He recognized Dr. Alani Williams, not from the investor wall, but from the cover of his own magazine 6 months prior. He now had a front-row seat to a corporate implosion. Finally, Alani reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. She unlocked it and navigated to her contacts. "Ms. Rossi," she said, her voice business-like now, "what is the direct line to Robert Sterling's office?" Isabella's last remaining vestiges of colour drained from her face. Robert Sterling was the chief executive officer of Ascendia Air. He was a figure of almost mythical status within the company, a man whose name was only ever spoken in hushed, reverent tones. The idea of a passenger calling him directly from a lounge reception desk was unthinkable. Mr. Sterling," Isabella stammered. I don't have that number, Dr. Williams. We can't disturb him." "Don't worry," Alani said, a flicker of something that might have been irony in her eyes. "I have his personal mobile. I was just offering you the courtesy of trying the official channel first." She found the name in her phone, Robert Sterling, ASC. She pressed the call button. Isabella looked as if she might faint. The sound of the phone ringing in the quiet reception area was like a death knell. It was picked up after only 2 rings. "Alani," a rich baritone voice answered, warm and familiar. "I was just looking over the pre-flight numbers for the Zurich route. Everything looks solid. You on your way?" "Robert," Alani replied, her tone perfectly level. "I am. Or I'm trying to be. I'm currently standing at the reception desk of your flagship Zenith Club at JFK." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh?" Wonderful. Say hello to the staff for me. Isabella Rossi runs a tight ship there, one of our best. Does she? Alani said, her eyes locked on Isabella's terrified face. That's interesting, because Ms. Rossi, along with her guest relations specialist, Mr. Vance, have just spent the last 15 minutes refusing me entry. They suggested I was lying about my ticket, that I was a disturbance, and that I should try the more adequate lounge down the hall. The only reason they've stopped is that I pointed out my name on your investor wall. The silence that followed from the other end of the phone was absolute. It was a dense, heavy silence, pregnant with the sound of a CEO's world grinding to a halt. Gregory Finch, the journalist, leaned forward slightly in his chair, furiously thumb-typing notes. When Robert Sterling finally spoke, his voice was utterly changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial fury that was somehow more terrifying for its control. Alani, stay right where you are. Do not move. Put me on speaker. Alani tapped the screen of her phone and set it on the marble desk. Robert Sterling's disembodied voice filled the reception area, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of ice. Ms. Rossi, can you hear me? Isabella flinched, her body rigid with fear. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Sir. Ms. Rossi, you are to grant Dr. Williams immediate access to the lounge. You are to offer her any amenity she desires. You will then return to your office with Mr. Vance. You will not speak to any other staff. You will not speak to any passengers. You will not touch your computer. You will wait there for a call from Ascendia's Chief of Staff and a representative from Human Resources. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible. And Ms. Rossi, the voice from the phone continued, colder still, start thinking about what another career path might look like, because as of this moment, your employment in the service industry, at least any part of it I have influence over, is effectively over. The line went dead. Alani picked up her phone and slipped it back into her bag. She looked at the two shattered employees before her. She felt no triumph, no glee, just a profound sense of waste. I don't want champagne, she said quietly. I'm going inside to find a quiet corner. Do not disturb me. Without another glance at them, she walked past the desk and through the gleaming entryway into the Zenith Club, leaving the ruins of two careers scattered on the marble floor behind her. The phone call from Dr. Alani Williams was not a pebble dropped into the placid pond of Ascendia Air's corporate structure. It was a meteor strike. Within 90 seconds of Robert Sterling hanging up, a digital hurricane was unleashed from the C-suite on the 50th floor of Ascendia Tower in downtown Chicago. Sterling's first call was to his chief of staff, a brutally efficient woman named Amelia Hayes. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was a low, controlled growl, a promise of scorched earth. Amelia, we have a code black at JFK Zenith. Get HR and legal on a conference line. Now, the target is Isabella Rossi, club director, and a junior staffer, Julian Vance. I want them isolated, suspended, and escorted off the premises within the hour. No excuses. Understood, Robert. What's the precipitating event? Amelia asked, already typing furiously. They just denied entry to Alani Williams. There was a moment of stunned silence from Amelia's end. I'm sorry, Robert. Did you say the Alani Williams? Williams Thorne Capital? Alani Williams? The very same, Sterling seethed. Told her she wasn't their kind of clientele, or words to that effect. She had to point out her own name on the goddamn founder's plaque. This isn't just a service failure, Amelia. This is a 5-alarm corporate fire. This is an extinction-level event for our brand reputation, if it gets out. It's already out, a new voice said, joining the call. It was David Garrett, the head of Ascendia's legal department. I'm getting a ping from my media monitoring software. Gregory Finch from Forbes just posted on social media, fascinating display of customer service at Ascendia's JFK Zenith Club. Let's just say one of their top investors isn't pleased. Story to follow. He has 1.5 million followers, Robert. Robert Sterling closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Damn it, he breathed. Get communications online. I want a statement drafted. Abject apology. No excuses. Full transparency. Announce a complete review of all training and access protocols. Amelia, I want you on the next flight to New York. I want you to meet with Dr. Williams personally, if she'll have you. Offer her whatever she wants. And Rossi and Vance? Amelia asked. Termination, Sterling snapped. With cause. Gross misconduct. Violation of every principle this company stands for. I want their files, their performance reviews, everything, on my desk by morning. I want to know how we let a viper like Rossi get into a senior management position. While the executive team scrambled, a smaller, grimmer drama was playing out in the back office of the Zenith Club. Isabella and Julian sat in stunned silence in her small, windowless office. The vibrant, confident manager was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling woman who stared blankly at a motivational poster on the wall that ironically read, "Excellence is not an act, but a habit." Julian was quietly weeping, his shoulders shaking. My life is over, he mumbled into his hands. I'm never going to get another job. They're going to blacklist me. Isabella turned to him, her eyes vacant. Be quiet, she whispered. Just be quiet. Let me think. But there was nothing to think about. She had played the game of corporate politics for 20 years, climbing the ladder, rung by greasy rung. She knew how this worked. There would be no second chances. She wasn't being suspended pending an investigation. She was a liability being neutralized. The investigation would be a formality, a process of collecting the evidence needed to justify a decision that had already been made in the instant Robert Sterling had heard Alani's voice. Her mind raced, desperately searching for a defense. It had been a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. But how had it happened? She had always prided herself on her ability to size people up, to read their status in their clothes, their watches, their mannerisms. Dr. Williams had been unassuming, quiet, dressed for comfort, not to impress. She didn't fit the mold of the boisterous tech bros or the imperious banking magnates who usually populated the lounge, and she was a black woman. Isabella wouldn't have admitted it, not even to herself under torture. But that fact had been the foundation of her entire fatal assumption. In her narrow, prejudiced worldview, a woman who looked like Alani Williams was statistically more likely to be holding a fraudulent ticket than to be a titan of industry whose name was literally etched into the wall. It was a cognitive shortcut, born of deep-seated bias, and it had just driven her career off a cliff. The knock on the office door made them both jump. It was a sharp, official-sounding rap. Isabella opened it to find two people, a stern-faced woman in a sharp corporate suit she recognized as a regional HR director, and a burly uniformed man from airport security. Isabella Rossi. Julian Vance, the HR director said, her voice devoid of any emotion. I'm Cassandra Jenkins from Human Resources. We need you to gather your personal belongings. Your employment with Ascendia Air has been terminated, effective immediately. The official words, spoken so clinically, were more brutal than any shouting match. It was the sterile, bureaucratic end to their careers. Terminated, Isabella choked out. Without an investigation, without a hearing, I have rights. "You are an at-will employee, Ms. Rossi," Cassandra stated, consulting a tablet in her hand. "The company has exercised its right to terminate your employment for conduct unbecoming of a representative of the Ascendia brand. An official statement of cause will be sent to your legal counsel. The company will contest any claim for unemployment benefits. Now please, collect your things. You will be escorted from the premises." The process was swift and humiliating. They were watched as they packed their few personal items into cardboard boxes. A framed photo, a coffee mug, a desk plant. They were stripped of their ID badges and company phones. They were then marched like criminals through the back corridors of the airport, avoiding the public areas, and finally deposited unceremoniously on the curb of the departure's roadway. The automatic doors of the terminal hissed shut behind them, leaving them in the exhaust-fumed air, holding the sad little boxes of their former lives. Isabella stared blankly at the stream of yellow cabs, her mind a maelstrom of fury, regret, and terror. Julian just sank onto the curb, put his head in his hands, and sobbed. The hurricane had passed, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. By the time Dr. Alani Williams's flight was pushing back from the gate, the story was no longer a localized incident. It had gone viral. Gregory Finch's initial social media post was followed by a hastily written but devastatingly effective blog post on the Forbes website, titled, "Not Our Kind of Clientele." Ascendia Air's billion-dollar insult to one of its own founders. Finch's account was precise and damning. He detailed the condescending tone, the dismissive gestures, the refusal to check credentials, and the ultimate, horrifying reveal at the investor wall. He named Isabella Rossi and Julian Vance. He quoted the overheard snippets of conversation. The post was shared tens of thousands of times within the first hour. The hashtags Ascendia Shame and Flying While Black started trending globally. The public relations nightmare that Robert Sterling had feared was now a full-blown catastrophe. Ascendia Air's stock, which had been trading steadily, took a sharp nosedive in after-hours trading. The company's social media channels were inundated with a torrent of outrage. Competitors, smelling blood in the water, began offering status match promotions to disillusioned Ascendia frequent flyers. The karma for the airline was swift and brutal, hitting them where it hurt the most, their reputation and their bottom line. For Isabella Rossi, the reckoning was personal and absolute. She arrived home to find her email inbox flooded with notifications from news alerts bearing her name. Her LinkedIn profile was being bombarded with angry messages. A neighbor from across the street gave her a look of pure disgust. The bubble of her respectable, middle-class life had been violently burst. The next morning, a call came from Ascendia's legal department. They were offering her a severance package, but it came with a non-negotiable condition. She had to film a public apology. It was a classic corporate damage control tactic. Put a human face on the problem, make them seem contrite, and then discard them. Desperate and seeing no other option, she agreed. The resulting video was a disaster. Seated in a sterile, lawyer-approved setting, Isabella read from a teleprompter. Her apology was stilted, full of corporate jargon about unconscious bias and failing to live up to core values. There was no genuine remorse in her eyes, only the hollow fear of a person whose life had been ruined. The public saw right through it. The video was mercilessly mocked online, with commentators pointing out that she seemed more sorry about being caught than about her actual actions. She became a meme, the face of entitled, racist service, Airport Isabella. Her career in any public-facing role was not just over, it was radioactive. Julian Vance's fate was quieter but no less devastating. At 24 years old, with his first real career job ending in a global scandal, he was toxic. Recruiters ghosted him. Applications went unanswered. An interview for a low-level hotel management position ended abruptly when the interviewer Googled his name. He was forced to move back in with his parents, his future a blank, terrifying void. He spent his days replaying the incident in his mind, consumed by the shame of his cowardice. He had been so eager to please Isabella, so desperate to be accepted into what he saw as an elite world, that he had sacrificed his own decency. It was a hard, bitter lesson in the cost of silent complicity. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, Alani Williams sat in her first-class suite, the chaos unfolding far below her. Amelia Hayes, Sterling's chief of staff, had indeed caught the next flight and was seated a few rows back, having been instructed not to approach Alani unless invited. Alani wasn't looking at the news alerts or the social media storm on the in-flight Wi-Fi. She was reading a complex paper on quantum cryptography, her mind focused on the world of elegant equations and theoretical possibilities. But she was not oblivious. She knew the storm was raging. She had not instigated this for revenge. She hadn't asked for anyone to be fired or publicly humiliated. That was simply the natural consequence of their actions, the corporate machine's self-preservation instinct kicking in. What concerned her was not the fate of 2 disgraced employees, but the systemic rot their behavior represented. Firing them was like cutting off a single poisoned leaf from a dying tree. It did nothing to treat the disease in the roots. Ascendia Air had a deep cultural problem. It had so successfully marketed its brand on exclusivity that its own employees had begun to believe their job was to exclude rather than to serve. They had built a temple of luxury and then appointed gatekeepers who judged the worthiness of worshippers based on their own petty prejudices. As the plane soared through the dark, star-dusted sky, Alani closed her eyes. She wasn't thinking about the insult anymore. She was thinking about leverage. The incident, as ugly as it was, had given her immense leverage. Robert Sterling and the Ascendia board were terrified. They were bleeding money and credibility. They would be desperate to make this right, not just with an apology, but with tangible action. She could use that. She could demand more than just retribution. She could demand reform. She could take this moment of profound disrespect and forge it into a catalyst for genuine, lasting change. The karma that had struck Isabella, Julian, and the airline's stock price was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. It would not be a public shaming, but a quiet, structural revolution directed by her from the top down. 2 weeks later, Dr. Alani Williams walked into the Ascendia Air boardroom on the 50th floor of their Chicago headquarters. The mood in the room was funereal. The entire board was present, including a pale and visibly stressed Robert Sterling. The financial damage from the JFK incident was still being calculated, but it was in the tens of millions in lost bookings and market capitalization, to say nothing of the near irreparable harm to their brand. They were expecting a storm. They were prepared for Alani to demand Sterling's resignation, to threaten to divest her considerable holdings, to launch a shareholder lawsuit. They were braced for a fight. Alani entered the room and took her seat at the head of the polished mahogany table. She was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored dark blue suit. She placed a single thin folder on the table in front of her. She was not angry. She was not emotional. She was the very picture of calm, controlled power. "Good morning, gentlemen," she began, her voice filling the silent room. "I trust you've all been having a difficult couple of weeks. So have many of your customers, who are wondering if the values you espouse in your marketing materials bear any resemblance to reality." Sterling started to speak, to offer yet another apology, but Alani raised a hand to stop him. "Robert, I've read your public statements. and your personal letters of apology. I appreciate the sentiment. But apologies are insufficient. They are bandages on a gaping wound. I am not here today to seek retribution. I am here to propose a cure. She opened the folder. What happened at JFK was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a corporate culture that has become dangerously insulated and elitist. Your staff believed they were protecting a brand, when in fact they were corroding it from the inside out. You've confused luxury with exclusion and service with subservience. We are going to change that. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Sterling. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "The Phoenix Protocol." The mythological phoenix, Alani explained, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the board members, is a creature that is reborn from the ashes of its own destruction. Ascendia's reputation is currently in ashes. This is your chance for a rebirth. The proposal was audacious and comprehensive. It was not a suggestion. It was a series of non-negotiable demands tied directly to her continued investment in the company. First, it called for a complete overhaul of all customer-facing employee training. The new curriculum, which she would personally help design with a team of diversity, equity and inclusion (DEI) experts, would move beyond simplistic, unconscious bias modules. It would focus on situational awareness, de-escalation, and a core principle of assuming competence in every passenger. Second, it mandated the creation of a new, independent civilian oversight board for customer complaints, with real power to investigate and recommend disciplinary action, ensuring that future incidents couldn't be swept under the rug by internal management. Third, and most radically, she proposed the establishment of the Ascendia Access Initiative. A significant percentage of the airline's annual profits would be funneled into a foundation that provided grants and sponsored travel for students and young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds, giving them access to the same global opportunities that the airline's elite clientele took for granted. The Zenith clubs themselves would host quarterly networking events for these young leaders, personally attended by Ascendia executives. You will transform your lounges from mere waiting rooms for the rich into incubators for the next generation of leaders, Alani stated. You will not just serve the powerful, you will empower the promising. You will make your exclusivity about the excellence you foster, not the people you exclude. The board was stunned into silence. This was not what they had expected. It was a brilliant strategic move. It wasn't punitive, it was constructive. It allowed the company to not just apologize for its failure, but to reposition itself as a leader in corporate social responsibility. It turned the worst PR crisis in their history into a potential branding triumph. Robert Sterling looked down at the proposal, then up at Alani. He saw the genius of it instantly. She wasn't just saving her investment, she was saving his company from itself. "We agree," Sterling said, his voice firm, filled with a newfound respect and resolve. "We agree to all of it. The Phoenix Protocol is officially adopted, effective immediately." 6 months later, Alani Williams once again found herself walking through JFK's Terminal 4. She approached the entrance to the Zenith Club. The frosted glass doors and marble desk were the same, but the atmosphere felt different. The young woman at the desk greeted her with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome to the Zenith Club, Dr. Williams. It's an honor to have you with us today." Alani smiled back. "Thank you." As she entered the lounge, she noticed a change. The imposing, burnished bronze investor wall was still there, but it was no longer the centerpiece of the reception. On the opposite wall, in its place, was a large, dynamic digital display. It cycled through photos and biographies of bright, ambitious young people, the first scholarship recipients of the Ascendia Access Initiative, a young coder from Detroit on her way to a tech conference in Berlin, a brilliant debater from a community college in Texas flying to a competition in London, a promising artist from New Orleans heading to her first gallery show in Paris. Her gaze drifted back to the old brass plaque, the list of powerful names etched in metal. It represented the foundation, the capital that had built the airline. But the new display, vibrant and full of faces, represented the future. It was a testament to the idea that true value lies not in guarding gates, but in opening them. She had faced down an ugly moment of prejudice, and had not just won a battle for herself, but had reshaped the very definition of the space, transforming a symbol of exclusion into a beacon of opportunity. Dr. Alani Williams' story is a powerful reminder that the most profound victories aren't about revenge, but about reform. She faced down ignorance, not with rage, but with a brilliant strategy that turned a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for sweeping, institutional change. She proved that true power isn't just about having your name on a wall, it's about having the vision and courage to build new doors for others to walk through. Her story challenges us to look beyond snap judgments and to question the systems that allow prejudice to fester. What did you think of the way Alani handled the situation? Let us know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.